The llama's finger touched the map with absolute certainty, and Joanne Scott felt her skin crawl. Not from hope, from something else. Something in the way his eyes had gone completely white for 3 seconds before focusing again. Something in the way the temperature in the room had dropped so severely she could see her breath. Something in the way he smiled when he said, "You will meet your brother again." Not see, meet, as if her brother had become someone new. That was January 11th, 1992, 21. Days after James Scott had vanished into the Himalayas. 21 days of silence from mountains that had swallowed him whole. But the story really begins earlier, much earlier. December 21st, 1991. James Scott stood at the base of the Halambu Trail with his friend Tim and a man named Mark Fulton they'd befriended on the trek. The mountains rose before them like gods carved from stone and ice, and James felt something he'd never felt before on any of his hikes in Australia. A sensation of being observed, studied, weighed. The locals at the lodge the night before had warned them, not about the weather or the terrain, but about something else. The old woman who served them tea spoke in broken English about the hungry season. December through February, she said, when the mountains feed. When trekkers who go up don't come down, when the air itself becomes teeth. James had laughed it off. He was 22, fit, a black belt in karate, top of his medical school class. He was invincible in the way only the young and strong can feel. The mountains were just rock and snow. The thin air was just atmosphere. The cold was just physics. He was so wrong. The first 3 days were normal. Beautiful even. They climbed through forests where birds sang in languages that sounded almost like words. They crossed valleys where the wind carried scents of flowers that shouldn't bloom in December. They slept in lodges where other trekkers spoke in whispers about the things they'd seen in peripheral vision. Shapes that walked on too many legs. Faces in the rock that blinked. On the 4th day, everything changed. Mark decided to take a different path. A shortcut, he said, that would save them half a day. James and Tim agreed, following him off the main trail into what the map showed as empty space. Blank terrain, unmapped territory. The forest here was wrong. The trees grew at impossible angles, branches intertwining in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ground beneath their feet felt soft, almost organic, like walking on skin. And the silence. God, the silence. No birds, no wind. No sound except their breathing and the crunch of snow that wasn't quite the right color. Too gray, too much like ash. They walked for hours. The sun never seemed to move. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that made James's stomach turn. He looked at his watch. 2:47 p.m. He looked again what felt like 3 hours later. 2:51 p.m. That's when they found the shrine. It wasn't on any map. A structure of stacked stones in a clearing, covered in symbols that predated written language. Offerings surrounded it, rotted food, rusted prayer wheels, and something else. Photographs, dozens of them. Faded Polaroids and old prints showing trekkers. Smiling people in hiking gear, all standing in this exact spot. All dated. Some from the 1980s, some from the 1970s. One from 1952. And beneath each photograph, carved into the stone, dates of death. All of them had died within weeks of their pictures being taken. All of them had been found in the mountains. All of them had been alone when they died. Mark took a picture of James standing by the shrine with his camera. The flash seemed too bright, lingering on James's retinas long after it should have faded. When James blinked away the afterimage, he saw Mark and Tim staring at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Not concern. Something else. Recognition, maybe. Or pity. They didn't speak about the shrine. They just kept walking. By evening, they'd become separated. It happened so gradually that James couldn't pinpoint the exact moment he realized he was alone. 1 second, Mark was ahead of him on the trail. The next, the trail was empty. James called out. His voice echoed back wrong, layered, as if multiple versions of himself were calling from different points in space. He wasn't worried at first. The trail was clear. He'd catch up. But as darkness fell with unnatural speed, the sun simply vanishing rather than setting, James understood that something fundamental had shifted. The rules were different here. Physics worked differently. Time, space, causality, all negotiable. The temperature plummeted. Not gradually, but instantly, as if a door had opened to somewhere cold beyond imagination. James's breath crystallized in the air, forming patterns that looked almost like writing in a language he couldn't read, but somehow understood meant, "You belong to us now." He needed shelter. The wind had started howling, but it wasn't just wind. There were voices in it, hundreds of them, thousands, all speaking at once in that same ancient language, all saying the same thing: stay, feed, become. James found a rock overhang and crawled beneath it, setting up his sleeping bag with hands that had started to shake. Not from cold, from the growing certainty that he wasn't alone under that ledge, that something else had been waiting here, waiting for him specifically. He tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shrine, the photographs, the dates of death, and he understood with horrible clarity that his picture was already there, tacked to the stone, that his death date was already carved, that everything that would happen to him had already happened in some other configuration of reality. The mountains operated outside time. They could see all possible futures, all possible pasts, and they had chosen his suffering with the care of an artist selecting colors. Day 2 of being lost. James tried to navigate back to the main trail using his compass. The needles spun wildly, pointing at nothing or everything, or somewhere perpendicular to reality. His map was useless. The terrain it showed bore no resemblance to the landscape around him. Peaks that should be to the north loomed in the south. Valleys that shouldn't exist yawned beneath his feet. He wasn't just lost in space. He was lost in something deeper. The hunger started then. Not normal hunger. This was something primal, something cellular. His body was beginning to consume itself, yes, but it felt like something else was feeding too, like the mountain was slowly eating him from the inside out, digesting not just his flesh, but his memories, his personality, everything that made him James Scott. He found a stream and drank. The water tasted like copper, and something underneath the copper, something organic and ancient. It made him vomit, but his body was so desperate for liquid that he drank again, forcing it down. And as he did, he heard laughter, not external, internal, coming from somewhere deep in his own skull, where his thoughts should be. By day 5, the hallucinations began. Or were they hallucinations? James could no longer tell what was real. He saw other trekkers on distant ridges. They waved at him. He waved back. Then they'd turn, and their faces would be wrong. Too many eyes, mouths where mouths shouldn't be, expressions of recognition and hunger. He saw structures that couldn't exist. Buildings made of frozen mist, temples carved from solid darkness, and at their centers he saw figures that might have been monks, or might have been something wearing monk shapes like clothes. They chanted in that same ancient language, and James found himself chanting along, the words flowing from his mouth without conscious thought. The cold should have killed him. By day 7, he should have been dead from hypothermia. By day 10, dead from starvation. By day 15, dead from dehydration or exposure, or the 1,000 small failures that kill humans in extreme conditions. At night, he felt presences around his shelter. Things that breathed in rhythms that didn't match any living creature. Things that whispered in his ears about the history of the mountains, about the rituals performed here before humans had language, about the entities that had been old when the earth was young, sleeping in the peaks, dreaming of hunger. They told him he'd been chosen, that they'd seen him coming from years away, tracked his decision to come to Nepal, to trek the Himalayas, to take that specific wrong turn, that every choice he thought was his own had been guided, manipulated. The Lama's vision wasn't prophecy, It was instruction, a set of coordinates for where James needed to be harvested. By day 20, James had lost half his body weight. His skin had taken on a grey pallor that matched the ash snow. His eyes had changed. The whites were no longer white, but shot through with thin black lines like veins or roots. When he looked at his hands, he sometimes saw them as they were, skeletal, frostbitten, dying. Other times he saw them transforming, growing, becoming something else. The mountain was remaking him. He tried to pray, to God, to Buddha, to anything that might listen, but the only response was that same internal laughter. The entities in the peaks found human prayer hilarious, futile, like insects begging the exterminator. On day 30, James heard the first helicopter. He stumbled into the clearing, waving his sleeping bag, desperate. But as he did, he felt something in his mind resist, a command that wasn't his own thought. Not yet. You're not ready. You need more time to cure. The helicopter circled and left. And James felt relief mixed with his despair. Part of him, the part that was still human, screamed in anguish. But another part, the part that was growing, felt satisfied, patient. The transformation continued. His mouth ulcers weren't just infection. They were restructuring. His throat hurt because it was changing shape, becoming able to produce sounds human vocal cords couldn't make. His joints ached because they were rearticulating to allow movement in directions that violated human anatomy. By day 40, James barely remembered who he had been. The memories were there but fading, like photographs left in sunlight. He remembered a woman's face, his fiancée, but couldn't remember her name or why she mattered. He remembered Australia as a concept but couldn't picture it. He remembered being someone other than what he was becoming, but that person felt like a story he'd heard, not a life he'd lived. The mountain whispered, "Almost there. Just a few more days. Then you'll be perfect. Then you'll be ours completely. Then we can send you back down to the world of humans, wearing your old face, carrying our hunger." On day 42, the helicopter returned. This time, when James waved, he felt no resistance. The part of him that had been fighting let go. The transformation was complete, or complete enough. He was still James Scott, from a certain angle, in certain light, to observers who weren't looking too closely. But underneath, he was something the mountains had made, a seed they were sending back to civilization, an infection wrapped in familiar flesh. The rescue was ecstatic. They hugged him, kissed him, called him a god for surviving. They had no idea they were embracing something that had stopped being human somewhere around day 15. Something that had learned to mimic humanity perfectly, but no longer felt it. When Joanne ran to James on the landing pad, she embraced her brother and felt, just for a moment, how cold he was. Not surface cold, deep cold. The cold of something that had frozen from the inside out. But then he smiled. James's smile, exactly right, and she dismissed the feeling. Trauma, she thought. Just the ordeal he'd been through. James made a full physical recovery. The doctors were amazed. His body shouldn't have been able to heal from that level of damage, but it did, rapidly, almost as if it were being repaired by something other than natural biology. Within weeks, he looked normal, healthy. The black veins in his eyes faded. The restructuring reversed, or appeared to reverse. He returned to Australia, married his fiancée, completed medical school, became a doctor, lived a normal life, mostly, but there were incidents. Patients who died under his care in ways that couldn't be explained. Not many, just a few, just enough to satisfy the hunger that came from whatever lived in his core now. Medical errors, the reviews called them. Sad but unavoidable complications. And sometimes, late at night, James would wake with ash snow in his mouth and the sound of ancient chanting in his ears. He'd go to the mirror and see his eyes had gone completely black. See his mouth had too many teeth. See his reflection showing what he really was beneath the flesh costume. Then he'd blink, and it would be gone. Just normal James, just the survivor, just the miracle. The man who lived 43 days in impossible conditions. The man the mountain had mercy on. Mercy, that's what everyone called it. Divine intervention, incredible luck. The human spirit's triumph over nature. No one understood the truth. The mountain hadn't shown mercy. It had shown cultivation. It had planted something, tended it for 43 days, then sent it back to the lowlands to root and spread. The Lama who'd pointed to the map with such certainty never told Joanne the whole truth. He'd seen where James would be found, yes, but he'd also seen what would be found. Not the boy who'd gone up, but the thing that came down. The Lama served the mountain entities, had served them for generations. His job was to guide the harvest, to make sure the chosen ones were found and returned, to spread the infection further. "You will meet your brother again," he'd said. And he was right. She met something that looked like her brother, sounded like her brother, had all her brother's memories and mannerisms. But James Scott died somewhere around day 15 in the Himalayas. What came back was something else, something ancient and patient, something that could wait years or decades to fulfill whatever purpose the mountains had bred it for. The Himalayas are old, older than human civilization, older than human species. They've seen things rise and fall, and they've learned how to adapt, learned how to survive in a world increasingly dominated by humans. They learned how to make seeds, how to plant them in human flesh, how to send them out into the world. James Scott was just one of many. There are others, some who vanished for weeks in mountain ranges around the world, some who survived impossible ordeals, some who came back changed in ways too subtle to notice unless you knew what to look for. They live among us, work among us, marry us, have children who carry the mountain's genetics alongside human DNA. They're patient. The mountains taught them patience, and they're waiting for something. A signal, perhaps, a specific date, the right atmospheric conditions. No one knows except them and the entities that made them. In 2006, researchers began investigating James Scott's case. They wanted to understand how he survived. They studied his medical records, interviewed him, mapped his route. They found inconsistencies in his story, gaps in the timeline that didn't add up, biological markers in his blood that shouldn't exist. They published some of their findings. But the crucial data, the genetic anomalies, the structural changes in his brain scans, the way his cells divided in patterns that violated known biology, that data was classified, buried, sealed away by authorities who understood that some truths would cause panic. Because James wasn't unique. They'd found others, dozens of them, all survivors of extreme mountain ordeals, all carrying the same markers, all watching, all waiting. The mountains are patient. They have time. They've been here for millennia and will be here for millennia more. They've learned how to infiltrate the species that threatens them, how to turn humans into weapons against their own kind. And when the signal comes, whatever it is, whenever it arrives, those seeds will activate, all of them simultaneously across the globe. And humanity will learn what the mountains have been planning all along. James Scott lives in Australia now. He looks normal, acts normal, has a normal life. But on certain nights, when the moon is dark and the air is cold, his eyes go black, his smile shows too many teeth, and he stands at his window, facing the direction of the Himalayas, listening for instructions in a language that predated words. The Lama who pointed to the map died in 1995. His last words, translated from Nepali, were, "They're ready. The first wave is ready. Soon the mountains will walk." No one understood what he meant, but James did. All the seeds understood. They felt it in their bones, or in whatever had replaced their bones during those days of transformation. They felt the counting down, the approaching moment, the time when the mountains would stop being patient and start being active. If you've ever survived something impossible, something that should have killed you, something that left you changed in ways you can't quite articulate, check your eyes in the mirror tonight. Wait until the lights are off and the room is dark. Look closely at your pupils. See if there's something moving behind them, something ancient and hungry. See if the mountains have claimed you too, because they're still feeding, still choosing, still sending their harvest back into the world, wearing human faces like masks, carrying hunger like a virus. And when you see a survival story, a miracle rescue, an impossible ordeal overcome, a lone hiker found after weeks missing, don't celebrate too quickly. Don't assume it's a happy ending. Sometimes what comes back from the mountains isn't the person who went up. Sometimes it's just the mountain, learning how to walk on two legs, learning how to smile, learning how to pass as human while it waits for the signal that will make it reveal what it really is. James Scott survived 43 days in the Himalayas. But who or what came back? That's the question no one wants to answer. The question the Lama smiled about. The question the mountains keep as their deepest secret. They're patient, they're learning, and they're already here, among us, behind human eyes, waiting for the right moment to remind us who really owns this planet. The mountains remember. The mountains feed. And the mountains always get what they want.